My name is Ethan Miller. I am 34 years old, from Boulder, Colorado, a city surrounded by mountains that taught me it means to respect nature. I grew up climbing with my father, a man who believed that the silence of the mountains was where the soul truly reveals it. Perhaps that's why I've never been able to live far from them for long. When I decided to climb one of the trails in the Chilean Andes, I was not seeking fame or records. I just wanted to challenge myself. I had just come out of a long and that empty, craved isolation. I needed to prove to myself that I was still capable of fighting for something, even if it was just for me. I remember the feeling of arriving at the base of the mountain. The wind was biting and the air had that pure, almost metallic smell that only exists at high altitudes. The sky seemed closer, and the clouds moved as if they were in a... The landscape was beautiful, but at the same time merciless. Every wrong step could mean the end. As I organized my gear, I thought about how solitude could be liberating. No city noise, no human sounds, just the rustling of crack of ice. The mountain watched me in silence, and I felt that it was testing my determination. If you like real stories that show how far a human being can endure when lost, subscribe to the channel to follow more accounts like this. In that moment, I didn't know it, but I was about to fight the hardest battle of my life. Battle against the cold, the pain, and time itself. It would be a negotiation between the will to live and the despair of giving. The first step, everything seemed to go as planned. The weather was clear, the sky was blue, and the compact snow made progress easier. I checked each piece of equipment carefully, crampons adjusted, carabiners inspected, rope tightly secured to my waist. I learned to have after years of climbing in extreme environments. The trail I chose was not one of the most popular. I wanted solitude, and I got it. Just the sound of the wind cutting through the slope and the crack of ice under my boots. Each step was a silent conversation with the mountain. Let me pass. I promise to respect you. Reflected strong, nearly blinding. Even with sunglasses, my eyes burned. The air was thin and my breath short, but the feeling of achievement made up for everything. I felt my heart not from fear, but from euphoria. It was that old mix of adrenaline and peace that only climbers understand. Around noon, I took off my backpack, sat on a stone covered in ice, and took a sip of water from my canteen. In the distance, the mountains formed an irregular line, like stone teeth tearing at the sky. The wind began to change direction, colder and faster. I felt a shiver, not from cold but from alertness. The weather is going to change, I thought. I underestimated it. That was the mistake that would accompany me for the next few days, climbing. The clouds thickened, the light turned gray, and the ground began to get more slippery. With every meter, the ice surface became more treacherous. I pressed on, convinced I would reach the campsite before the weather closed in completely. But the mountain, cold and silent, had other plans. The wind started to blow hard when I was already in a more exposed part of the mountain at about 4,500 meters altitude. The sky, once blue, was now a heavy gray mass and into sharp crystals that hit my face like little blades. I pulled the hood of my jacket tight and moved slowly, testing each step with the ice axe before putting my weight down. It was in that stretch that everything happened. I remember the exact moment, the dry sound of ice breaking under my right boot. A crack, then emptiness. My body lost support, and suddenly I was falling. The world turned into a white blur, the wind screaming in my ears, the rope hitting against my chest, the ice axe, but the speed was too great. The impact came seconds later, strong and brutal. I hit the slope's wall and slid to a stop inside a narrow where the sunlight barely reached. The silence was absolute. For a few seconds, I just listened to my racing heart and the sound of snow settling around me, and that's when I felt the pain, deep pain in my left leg. I looked down and saw the worst. My leg was trapped between two plates of ice. To pull it, but the movement made the pain explode. It was as if something had torn inside. Panic began to spread. I looked up. The crevice was at least 5 meters high with smooth walls, no foothold. The radio had come loose during the fall and disappeared somewhere in the snow, alone. The cold inside was different, cutting, alive. My breath came out in white clouds, and I felt the moisture freezing on my face. By instinct, I began to assess my hands intact, arms with scrapes. The leg was another story. Swollen, immobilized, trapped in a way that seemed impossible to free. Calmly, but my mind was already starting to spiral into despair. The wind howled out. The echo inside the crevice amplified the sound, as if the mountain was laughing at me. It was there in that hole of ice and solitude that I realized I could die here. and no one would know where to look, control my breathing. The pain in my leg was so strong, it felt like it was vibrating inside the bone. The cold made everything slower, heavier. I looked down again, trying exactly how I had gotten stuck. The crevice was narrow but deep, formed by two walls of ice that met at an irregular angle. My left leg between them on impact, and now it was compressed as if the mountain had decided not to let me go. The worst part wasn't just the pain, it was the feeling of helplessness. I moved my foot, or tried to, and felt something trapped, hard, resistant. It could have been a block of ice, a rock, or even part of the very collapsed. With each attempt to pull my leg, my whole body trembled. The pain surged up my back like an electric current. I ran my hands along the ice walls, searching for any support. The surface was smooth, damp, and cold. In some spots there were sharp crystals that cut into my skin when I pressed. The space was so tight that I could barely move my torso back. The crevice swallowed my waist, making everything even more claustrophobic. The wind blew through the upper openings and descended like a cold breath on the back of my neck. I felt my hands starting to go numb. I tried to stay focused. I repeated softly, "Think, Ethan, think," as if hearing my own name could anchor me to reality. My leg again, this time more carefully. There was no visible blood, but the swelling was already starting to show. I touched the area with my fingertips and felt a strange warmth contrasting with the cold of the rest of my body. It was the kind of warmth I knew well, inflammation, possibly a fracture. It was hard to admit, but I knew I wouldn't get out of there by sheer brute force. I needed calm, creativity, and time, three things I didn't have. The temperature was dropping, and my body was beginning to lose energy faster than I could manage. I knew I had to fight. I lifted my eyes to the narrow beam of light coming from the top of the crevice. It was weak, almost symbolic, but at that moment it felt like a reminder that there was a world out there waiting for me, and that maybe I could still reach it. The cold began to creep through my body like a silent. First, my hands became stiff, then the toes started to tingle, and soon I felt the numbness rise up my calf. It seemed to relieve the pain for a few moments, but I knew it was just my body yielding to the ice, and there in that narrow hole, every lost minute was a real threat. The pain in my leg throbbed in waves, matching my breathing as if it were connected to my heart. I tried to inhale slowly, but the air was so cold it burned my throat. My head began to feel heavy, and consciousness came in flashes. Sometimes I stared at the ice wall and had the impression that it was breathing with me, expanding and contracting, as if the mountain were alive and watching me. It was at that point that fear took form, a raw, simple, and direct fear, dying there. Not but slowly freezing, with the pain fading until it turned into silence. I thought of of the void I had tried to fill by going to the Andes, of the choices I made without imagining where they would lead me. I felt a deep sadness, a sensation of a goodbye I didn't want to accept. The wind outside howled like a warning. With each gust, ice crystals fell on my face, creeping into the collar of my jacket. I tried to adjust behind me to block some of the cold current, but the space that any movement felt like it was tearing a piece off my leg. Despite the pain, I knew that if I fell asleep, I talked to myself in a low voice, asking nonsensical questions, anything to keep my mind functioning. How much time do I have? Who will miss me? Why did I come alone? My voice came out weak, hoarse, but it was all I had. Sometimes I thought I heard as if someone were walking up the slope. I held my breath, tried to scream, but it was just the wind. Always the wind. It was there, in that frozen moment between pain and despair, that I understood no one would come anytime soon. If I wanted to get out of there alive, to find a way to free myself, even if that meant facing the pain head-on, with no guarantees that my body could withstand it. The action I needed to survive that night. And that seemed, at that moment, almost impossible. Night fell brutally. The little light that came through the crevice vanished, as if someone had turned off the world. The cold became a physical presence, almost an animal breathing on top of me. My leg throbbed sometimes feeling like it was burning, sometimes going numb. I no longer knew what was worse, feeling everything or feeling nothing. It was in that darkness that I made the first desperate try to force myself free. The ice walls with my trembling hands, digging my fingers into small fissures, and pulled my body back with all the strength I had left. The pain was so intense that it tore a scream from me, a scream that echoed through the crevice and returned distorted, as if another person was suffering with me. Again and again, each pull made my vision darken at the edges, as if I were about to pass out. My leg felt trapped by something deeper, as if the ice had molded around me. At one point I realized I was crying, warm tears that barely dripped down before freezing on my face. My mind began to fail. I remembered things that made no sense, like the smell of my mother used to make when I was a child, or the sound of the river that passed behind my father's house. The memory came as both a comfort and a threat. It was as if to give up, saying it was easier to let go. I spoke to myself without realizing it. "You're not going to die here. You're not going to die here." I repeated the phrase until it lost its meaning. Fatigue was so great, head drooping forward, my body succumbing to numbness. I closed my eyes for a few seconds and almost fell asleep. And that me more than the pain. To avoid passing, I started slapping my hands on the ice, forcing my body to react. Each hit, my breath came in tremors, and the cold air stung my chest. Despair began to turn into anger, a hot, visceral anger directed at myself for coming alone, not backing out when the weather turned, for underestimating the mountain. In a moment of pure collapse, I shouted for help. I screamed until my throat burned off the walls and disappeared into the void followed by the night. There was no response. No human voice, no footsteps, just the distant murmur of the wind bringing the certainty I was alone. After the scream, the silence was even more cruel. I felt my body give way again, my mind wavering between consciousness. For a moment, I swear I saw a light up above, as if someone were looking for me, but there was nothing. Just imagination, my brain trying to give me some hope to keep me from giving up. As dawn approached, I was exhausted, trembling, with chapped lips and my leg burning from within. I could no longer cry. I could no longer think straight. One thing, a way to free my leg when the sun rose. That might be the last night of my life. And for the first time, I truly felt the weight of that possibility. Not as fear, but as a shadow that began to settle beside me. Patient the right moment. When the first ray of light came through the opening of the crevice, I no longer knew if I had slept or just lost consciousness for a few minutes. The dawn brought a little warmth, but it also revealed the trembling, exhausted, and with my leg throbbing in a way that made me clench my teeth to avoid screaming. Still, that light meant one important thing. I had one more day. Maybe the last. It was still a day. Clarity returned slowly, as if my mind had to rebuild itself after the previous night. And with it came a simple yet cruel question. How am I going to get out of here? I observed the trapped leg more closely this time, without despair, trying to understand the mechanics of the fall had pushed my shin into a crevice that narrowed a few inches below. I was trapped not only by the swelling but also by pulling up only increased the pressure. I needed to change the position of my leg, and for that I would need a lever. I looked around. The backpack was behind me, partially ice wall. With difficulty feeling my fingers tingle, I passed the items one by one: empty water bottle, frozen food hard as a rock, extra gloves, and then the ice axe. The tip was intact, the blade strong, but perhaps it would be enough. I gripped the handle with my numb. My plan was simple: break or wear down the ice around my leg, creating enough space to turn it. But each blow would generate vibrations that could cause a slide, or worse, trap me even more. Even so, I had no alternative. The fall, the night, the pain, everything had led me to that point. Either I tried or I died there. I started slowly. A tap, almost a touch, just to feel the reaction of the ice. The vibration shot up my leg like a knife. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I hit again and again. With each impact, I felt the crevice tremble. But I also noticed small chips breaking off. It was little, almost nothing, but it was something. The pain didn't let up. At one point, I had to stop because my vision started to blur. I rested my head against the ice wall, breathing fast, fighting the urge to give up. I was exhausted, hungry, cold, and scared. But there was something bigger than all that, the visceral need to stay alive. After a few minutes, I resumed the strikes. Each chip that broke free was a victory. Each little piece of ice on my lap meant I still had a chance. When I finally managed to create a slightly wider crevice, I tried to move my leg to the side. The pain was so intense that I lost my breath, but the movement almost impossible worked. It was the first real proof that my idea could succeed. The sun rose slowly, illuminating with a pale glow. First time since the accident, I felt something like hope. Fragile, distant, but real. I was still trapped, still injured, still alone, but now I had a plan, and that was enough to keep. I continued hitting the ice until I lost feeling in my fingers, from my hand all the time, and I had to grip the handle between my palms to keep it from falling. My arms trembled, Each strike was weaker than the last, persisted. The sun was high enough to warm the surface of the crevice slightly, and that helped soften some spots of the ice. Not much, but enough to... After almost an hour, the right side of my leg began to loosen. I felt a small shift, maybe a centimeter, but the sensation was so clear that I leaned my body against the wall and pushed my leg to the side, using the little movement that the newly created space allowed. Pain exploded like a warm wave. I knew I would need to face the decisive moment, that all my strength. There was no way to do that slowly. The muscle was already hardened by the cold, the swelling worsened by the minute, and if I didn't act soon, my body might simply shut down. I stayed there for a few moments, trying to regain some of the strength I had left. The silence inside the crevice was total. Like even the wind had stopped to watch. I placed the ice axe under my thigh as a lever, braced my hands against the icy walls, and counted mentally. 1, 2, I pulled. The world opened up in pain. My leg came out all at once, scraping against the wall of the crevice, and I screamed so loudly that my voice echoed several times. I fell backward, my heart hammering in my chest. The pain was unbearable, the pain of freedom, and that changed everything. For several long minutes I lay there, trying not to pass. When I caught my breath, I began to test my leg. I couldn't put any weight on it. The pain indicated that there was a fracture, perhaps in the tibia bone. That meant getting out of the crevice would be a challenge. I used the ice axe for support and began to drag myself along the wall. Small cracks offered me some points but the ascent was slow and desperate. Each movement made my leg protest, each pull made my arms tremble. At one point, I almost slipped back. I clung to the wall with all the strength I had left, my nails scraping against the ice. My breathing turned into a continuous groan, but I kept going, had to keep going. When I finally reached the edge, I threw half of my body onto there, breathing the cold air as if oxygen in the world, warm for the first time in days. Around me was silent, immense, relentless, but now I was back on the surface. I still needed to find help. I still needed to survive in an environment that remained hostile. At that moment, lying there with my face pressed against the snow, I felt something as before the fall, the certainty that I still had a chance, and that, there in the Andes, was worth more than strength. It was what would keep me alive until the end. I knew I couldn't stay there for too long. The cold was still, and my leg, although free, was incapacitated. I made a makeshift splint with the shaft of the ice axe, a strip of fabric from my backpack, and rigid parts of my gear. It wasn't comfortable or safe, my leg from moving too much. The pain was still there, firm, throbbing as a constant reminder. Little time. I began to drag myself slowly down the slope, using my arms to move forward and my good leg to push my body. Every meter gained felt like a kilometer. The wind began to blow stronger again, raising small whirlwinds of snow that cut across my face. The cold air burned my lungs, and the altitude was unforgiving. I was breathing short, quick breaths, as if I were running, even while moving at miserably slow steps. At one point I realized I was getting too dizzy. The world was spinning. The sky seemed to curve on my side, breaths, struggling not to pass, staying there, just for a few seconds, just to rest. The image of the crevice returned to my mind, so vivid that I felt the ice on my skin again. No, I couldn't stop. I kept going down the slope until I reached a small plateau, and it was there, at that point, that I heard the first human sound since my fall. A buzzing coming from somewhere above me. At first, the wind, but it repeated, a helicopter. My heart tried to get to my knees to wave, but my leg wouldn't allow it. From my jacket, tied it to the end of the ice axe, and began to spin it in the air, making a makeshift flag. I yelled, even knowing my voice might not reach anywhere. The helicopter, I could see the sunlight reflecting off the fuselage, see the movement of the blades lifting snow far away. They were looking for me. They were really looking for me. I felt tears, but I didn't let them fall. I needed to focus. I needed to be seen. And above me, the wind generated by the blades almost pushed me back down the slope. Shielding my face with my arm, I could see only pieces. A rescuer descending on a rope, snow flying in all directions, the deafening sound of the helicopter blades. The man landed near me, firmly bracing himself in the snow. He touched my shoulder, looked directly into my eyes and nodded affirmatively. "You are safe now," he said. It was only then, at that exact moment, I finally understood that the worst was over. All the pain, the fear, the despair accumulated over hours. All collapsed at once, blacked out before I was even hoisted up. But before consciousness completely, I remember thinking just one thing. I survived. I survived. I woke up inside the helicopter, wrapped in thermal blankets with an oxygen mask pressed against my face. Everything felt distant. The voices, the cold, the constant pain in my leg. It was as if I had been ripped from a nightmare and thrown back without warning. The rescuer beside me held my wrist, monitoring my signs, and when he realized I had come back to myself, he just nodded, as if to say, "You made it." In the hospital, while they treated the fracture and the first signs of hypothermia, I could barely speak. Not from pain, but from shock. The ward smelled of medications and that very human environment, even more aware of the contrast with the frozen hole where I had almost spent my last night. The medical team asked me what I remembered, how everything had happened, but it took me a while to formulate answers. It was as if each crossed miles of ice before reaching my mouth. It took days for my body to start responding better, but the physically easy part, the hard part, was facing the moments of silence. The room was dark, when no nurse passed by in the hallway, when the only sound was the constant beep of the monitors. In those moments, I would return to the crevice. I would feel the wind again, tightness in my chest, the pain tearing through my leg. I would relive the fear of closing my eyes. It was in those silences that I began to noticed before. The solitude on the mountain was not just the absence of people. It was a mirror as large as the Andes. I had to confront everything I had run away from for years. The feeling of not being enough, fear of failure, the weight of poor choices, the pain I tried to silence by seeking ever greater challenges. The mountain put me face to face with myself and would not. Yet in that crevice, when I thought I had nothing left, I discovered something I never imagined I would find: a deep desire to live. Not out of pride, not out of stubbornness. Things I always overlooked: the warmth of coffee in the morning, the touch of someone you love, the sound of laughter at home, this walking without pain. After I was discharged, I returned to the United States with the awareness that I would never be the same. I still love mountains, I still respect solitude, but now I understand that life is not in the heights you do when you come down, in the courage to keep going, even when you think you can't anymore. When I close my eyes, I still feel the cold of that, but I also feel the strength I found there, in the most unlikely place. And that is what I carry with me. If this story inspired you or made you reflect on human strength, courage, and the value of every small moment in life, leave your comment and subscribe to the channel for more true stories of overcoming and survival.